There you go. So we have Rebecca and Hannah. Okay, so I'm the moderator. I'm Jennifer. Now I'm going to turn it over to Hannah. Go ahead.
Right, so I'm Hannah. I'm an artist and I specialize in medieval style art, especially illuminated manuscripts. So medieval book art.
That's awesome.
That's wonderful. That's what I have up there. It's so far away, so but it's a page from a manuscript. So that's what I do. And so that's what all of my research and all of my art practice is about now.
I just want to follow her around. Okay, let's find out about Rebecca.
Great. Hi, I'm Rebecca Slitt. I currently work for Choice of Games, writing and editing interactive fiction. But previously, I was a medieval history professor. My research focused on 12th century England, specifically the culture of chivalry and construction of chronicles. So I am now editing medieval fantasy. It is fun for me to draw on my knowledge of actual medieval history.
That's awesome. Okay, so if we were at a real conference, I would be found later in the bar with these two women. Okay, so let's get right into it. I have a few questions here. I'm going to be monitoring the Discord and the chat. We're going to request that if you can to put any questions in the Discord, and I'll try to get to them as they fit into the questions that I kind of set up to start us. So I'll start us with a couple of things, and then I'll, as people are responding, I will be finding other interesting questions from you guys. Okay, so what are some things that you've seen in a novel set in a medieval world that really made you want to throw your book against the wall?
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you asked this question, I was trying to think of like specific moments from specific novels, but the thing that I see coming up over and over again that really bothers me is authors not respecting medieval people. The idea, you can see it in the way they write about medieval people, this sort of patronizing attitude, like, oh, those poor benighted people, they had not invented reason yet, or they did not understand, you know, that the earth goes around the sun. How stupid can you be? And it's just so ungenerous. And you know, medieval people were not stupid because they hadn't invented telescopes yet. They were doing the best they could with the information they had available. And it bothers me when authors don't take that into account or use medieval people as a way of asserting dominance over the past.
And you can find ways, you can do that honestly with the knowledge that they had and not make them look stupid.
Yes, exactly. You know, you can show them thinking and reasoning and drawing conclusions from their evidence to show that they were being intelligent and doing good academic work with the available sources.
Okay, Hannah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've encountered that a lot too, especially with doing art. People, most of the ways that you learn about medieval art is you learn about it through learning about Renaissance art, and it's like, well, here's bad Gothic art and here's good art. Draw good, and that's the history of art. But it's not bad. It's just different. It's still beautiful. It still takes enormous skill. Part of like the word Gothic isn't like, it was originally kind of a pejorative term where it was, oh, that's because like art history movements are like named in retrospect. It's like, oh, this is the Renaissance, we do the good art now, so the period before us is Gothic, it's gross, it's barbaric. So You see that a lot.
Right, the Goths were literally barbarians, and they're well, I mean, which itself is super problematic. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question here. I have one question that's going to feed into this other question that I saw. But I'm actually not sure if this question was for us or for the panel before, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But first, what author do you think really gets things right? Let's start with Hannah.
Yes. This one got me really excited. I think, as someone who does medieval books and medieval art, I really like Ursula K. Le Guin. And in her books, especially the Earthsea series, most of the people that you meet in those books rely on songs and stories because it's not many people have books. So stories and songs are the way that they would keep information alive. The only people who have books are like the wizards and towers because books are expensive. So that's something that I love about her books.
Rebecca?
Yeah, there are two authors who I think do a really great job evoking an authentic medieval feel. One is Kate Elliott in the Crown of Stars series, and that's unusual because it's set in the early Middle Ages, and it is a slightly alternate version of the real world with a few key things changed. And one of the things I admire about the way she approaches it is she does a really good job of thinking in a medieval way about how those changes would have affected society. And she does a really good job of evoking medieval rural life with farmers and artisans, and also religious life with priests and monks and abbesses and nuns. So I really admire that. And for medieval urban life, Saladin Ahmed in Throne of the Crescent Moon is the most wonderful depiction of a sort of vaguely Middle Eastern medieval city. It's really wonderful.
You know, it actually, that is a good lead into the next question. I was going to say, for myself, I love Robin Hobb. Guy Gavriel Kay, I think, also does a similar job to what you were saying, Hannah, with using, you know, written and, you know, kind of that has that kind of troubadour feel to it. Patrick Rothfuss, of course. Bernard Cornwell isn't really fantasy, but I love Bernard Cornwell. And then somebody on, let's see, Kent Bridgman said, do you have any resources for creating a fictional medieval society that isn't based on European history? So that speaks to what you were saying about that. Oh, and somebody said Throne of the Crescent Moon is good. I don't know that.
Yes, it's really, really good. Everybody go check it out. Saladin Ahmed, who is now writing for comics. He's currently writing Ms. Marvel.
Gotcha. Yep.
Yeah.
Hannah, do you have any ideas about that? Or do you mostly work with European?
A lot of my biggest resource is, since I do visual things, is online museums, especially now. Most museums and libraries that have like manuscript collections or art collections are putting everything online. So if there's a book you want to see, whether it's, and again, there are some wonderful manuscripts that aren't European, and those will be online. And you can zoom in, you can read the whole thing, and it'll just all be online.
Do they typically have translations if it's not in English?
They'll usually have translations too. One of my favorite manuscripts is the Morgan Crusader Bible. Yes. And so that's a book that it's a manuscript, but it has captions in 3 languages, so Latin, Judeo-Persian, and Persian. I believe so. You can just see it all online, and they have commentary and translations of every language. So that's always my advice: is find a museum and see what they have for you to look
Yeah, I know since I do a lot of work with Egypt, there's a new Egyptian museum going in. Don't think it's open yet, but they have made a lot of things available online, and then a lot of the Egyptologists who are working in the field have their own blogs. Like I follow a few Egyptologists, and then they point me to things that are interesting. There's so much online, but I research everywhere, libraries, online, I buy the books. I always say that I hope that someday I will make enough off of my books to pay for all the research I did for my books. So there's just so many places to go and things to see depending on what culture you're talking about. You really just have to hunt them down and sort of build your own resources. I usually keep a list of everything in case somebody needs something in that particular time period. You know, I have so many people who say, "Oh my gosh, go to Jennifer. She knows everything Egyptian." I'm like, no, I only know like 1350 to 1400 BC, South Egypt. You know, like that's it.
That's the thing. Like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, and just how much there is out there.
There is a lot, and there's so much out there of things that just don't get written about a lot. That there's so much to mine to make some really great, unique stories. People we've never heard of, and things that people did that we had no idea they did. Oh my gosh, just go down the rabbit hole.
And a resource that I wanted to add that is a good starting place is a blog called Medieval POC. Which is both very good for expanding people's views of what medieval Europe was like, and also bringing up resources for the same time period outside of Europe. And Hannah, you're going to love it. It started as an art history blog, showing the actual diversity of people living in medieval Europe through their depictions in art. And now they are a huge collection of images and bibliographies, and it's really, really wonderful. So yeah, start there, chase some of their bibliographies and links, and you will find a lot of really, really good stuff.
Okay. So funny, like it's almost like the attendees are reading my mind. They must have had my questions ahead of time. So AP Thayer says something almost very similar to what my next question was going to be. There is a difference between historical fiction set in the Middle Ages and fantasy that has a setting that evokes the Middle Ages. So just because it's fantasy doesn't mean you don't have to know things about real medieval history if you want to set it in a believable medieval-esque world. What are some of the important restrictions or allowances you can make if you're writing fantasy? And AP says, where do you draw the line between something inaccurate and something that's just created different? So very similar question.
Oof. This one is hard. As a historian who also writes and edits medieval fantasy, this is something that I come up against a lot, both how accurate is something and what things are historically accurate but don't get perceived as historically accurate. Joe Walton has this fabulous article called The Tiffany Problem. And so the name Tiffany, Theophania, was actually really common in 12th century England. But if you name a 12th century English character Tiffany, nobody's going to believe them. So you have to sort of walk that line. And the trouble is that a lot of our preconceptions about what medieval Europe was like have been handed down from people who either did not see the full picture or purposely suppressed some aspects of the full picture, or did not realize that they weren't getting the full picture because their only sources had purposely suppressed it. So in many cases, when you show something that was historically accurate, your audience will not perceive it that way. So I, as a reader and editor, will give a lot of latitude to things that feel medieval as long as you make a case for it in your fantasy world building. If you have magic that speeds up communication times or travel times, great. That's wonderful. It is not authentically medieval to be able to instantaneously communicate with somebody on the other side of the world, but if you have magic that can do that, awesome.
Go ahead.
And so yeah, do what you want, just make a case for it and show how it affects the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been my experience too, is the medieval period is so huge and so much happened in it that we just don't recognize that if you do actually look and try to be historically accurate, you'll come up with so many things that are so unique. And so I'd always, I would recommend digging a little deeper just to see what you find. And yeah, as far as I do think that things like communication and travel time will make a pretty huge difference in whatever you do.
Yeah.
Inventing paper, like if your medieval world has paper somehow, it's going to actually make a huge difference in how people can save information, how much books cost. So little things like that. That's something I'm always on the lookout for, is what are your books made of?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, this is an issue that comes up in any type of historical fiction, fantasy or real historical fiction. What do you put in if it's true? What do you put in if it's not true? And the problem, I guess it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Historical readers are so smart that if they come across something that they know is not right, they will email you. You just hope they don't like knock on your door, but they will let you know. So if you're putting something in that's not true, but you need it for your story, you either have to explain it within the text, or it's some like straight historical fiction, you put it in an author's note. You have to let them know that you know it's not true, but it's there for your story. And I think that's like a big thing that will make sure your book doesn't get thrown against the wall. But like there's amazing things that happen, and it's funny because a lot of historical writers will complain to their friends like, this person came on and blasted me and gave me a 2-star review because they said this didn't happen. Well, here is the history that says it did happen. Like, so, and the other thing is, when I'm writing, I tend to research as I'm writing a lot of things, but if I'm in the middle of writing something really fast and I don't have time or I don't have access to my materials, I'll make a note to myself, check this detail. But if I don't, my knowledge to myself is, if I don't check this detail, I've already checked it and I know it's right. And I was reading through one of my final drafts one time and I read something, I'm like, that cannot be right. And I can't believe I didn't mark it. And so I like went through this whole thing and looked it all up again, and it was right. So there's some pretty amazing things that happen that even when you've researched them the first time, you don't even know. When Holmes says, when writing high fantasy, what are the 3 things an author should get right? And what are the 3 things fantasy authors normally fail at? Well, I don't know if we can enumerate those, but we can at least come up with one.
Make your armor wearable. Oh my gosh. Like, you can have like painted stuff on your armor, but if you have like sprays of metal coming out of your shoulders or 3-foot towers on your helmet, you are not going to be able to fight in that stuff. Oh my god. Think if you are, knights are awesome. They are great. You should totally have them. You can have them riding dragons if you want. That's even more awesome. But think about what they would be wearing, how they could move in that. and make sure that you are putting them in something that they can move in, and something, and then make them move in that way. And also, like, a lot of medieval armor is not given credit for how movable it is. For another really cool online resource, the Royal Armory in Leeds in the UK has some great videos of its staff actually wearing medieval armor, not, you know, like creations, and like jumping around or jumping up from lying down or running on a treadmill, like, you know,
running on a treadmill.
running on a treadmill.
I know
A
what
doctor, like, you can do it. It's not good for you, but you can. So that is my one plea to fantasy authors: research armor, find out how it actually worked, and make your people wear armor that they can actually fight in. Oh my gosh.
and swords. You know,
Yes.
like everybody has the swords that they pull out. Like, how many people would get their parts
If you
of
have
the body
six,
cut off?
if you have a tall person and a 6-foot-long sword, your arms are like,
Yeah, like how far are you to get that? Right? You know, you can't tell, but I'm 4'11". That sword's not coming out very far. It would have to be a dirk in that.
Yeah, I'm 5'2". The swords are taller than I am. All right. All right, that's my thing.
Hannah, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, armor is a good one. Like, there's a reason I started doing armor that's like just $12.50, where it's like, it's chainmail. I can draw chainmail. We'll just do chainmail for everything.
Yeah,
One
you do
thing-
have to remember that the medieval period is it's basically, you know, like 500 to 1500. It's 1,000 years. A lot of things happen in 1,000 years. A lot of changes, even in the Dark Ages. Like, one of the things that that always catches me is like corsets, because there were no corsets in the Middle Ages.
No corsets.
That was Renaissance. No corsets.
No. No.
Let's see. Witch hunts also very late medieval to mostly Renaissance. No witch hunts in there, like
That's like
1200.
Yeah, so many things that get called medieval are actually like 16th century.
Yeah.
Yeah, and witch hunts are a huge example of that. Yeah.
Yes. Rebecca, do you know the Book of the City of Ladies by Christine de Pizan?
Love it.
Yeah, the Book of the City of Ladies.
Yeah, Christina Pizan is fabulous. And speaking of things that are not often, you know, included in images of the medieval world, you know, here is an independent woman making a living as a writer.
Yes.
Wow.
Go ahead.
I have to read that.
Things to tell about it.
Wonderful. She wrote this book that's like a catalog of famous women in history, but she's writing it in the early 1400s. And she talks about things that you'd expect, like, oh, this is a queen, this is a saint, but she also talks about famous sorceresses. And it's like, oh, this woman was really, really skilled at reading flames and predicting the future and
Wow.
doing all sorts of witchcraft. And you go, oh, I guess that is the skill. So they're both there. It's fantastic.
And there's a big increase in the number of books that are dealing with you know, women protagonists, especially in roles that we aren't used to seeing them in. And to speak to the outside of Europe thing again, that's happening a lot I guess because there are characters that we haven't seen before, been written about much before, that are women. It's a little more accessible to do them when it's not in a European setting. So there's just so much more to find out. There's so much we don't know about outside of European settings. Somebody asked, how can you get access to papers if you don't have JSTOR? If you don't know, JSTOR is an academic site.
Yeah, I think JSTOR has been opened up recently because of the stuff.
Because of the
I'm
stuff.
don't
Everything
quote
is
me
now
on that.
free.
Don't quote me on that.
You can get the and also you can get like the beginnings of articles even if you don't pay for JSTOR, and you can always contact your local library to see if they can do a search for you. If you have the name of the article that you want, they may have, or they may even have a subscription to JSTOR that you can use through your library. Libraries have a lot of subscriptions that a lot of people don't use, so that is another big resource that you should use if you if you don't have anything close to you. And so many libraries, I mean, they have their subscriptions and you can access them online. You don't have to go to the actual library. So call your librarian if you ever have questions about something you need to get a hold of. Librarians are magic. How about other, okay, let's go to this one. So let's go with some more book recommendations. Medieval Europe and other places. What are your favorite books in this setting, in this time? Rebecca's like, I can't hold it in.
I will give you my favorite of the last year.
Okay. It's such a loaded question. What's your favorite book in? I don't know. The top 10. Top 10.
One really excellent book that I've read in the last year is The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson. Talking about about expanding people's ideas of what medieval Europe includes. It's set in Granada, in the Muslim kingdom in Spain in 1491. So like just before the kingdom of Granada fell. And it is about a map maker and a concubine who discover a wonderful map and have a wonderful friendship and go on adventures together. And it is beautifully, beautifully written, and it starts in the real world and goes into a fantasy world, but they start in the real world with an idea that magic exists and that the real world can be magical. And I love it for all of those reasons: the beautiful writing, the people who don't always get talked about, and a part of the world that does not always get talked about.
Are you, Hannah? She's looking up a book.
Let me double check. Yes.
I hate that when you have like, okay, I can't remember their last name, I remember their first name.
So for me, it's Sailing to Sarantium because it's about a mosaicist.
Oh.
That's, yeah, a not technically not Byzantine mosaicist. So this one is, I think, Guy Gavriel Kay. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, that's good.
I haven't read any other fantasy novels that are about mosaicists. So that one will always be very special to me.
That's cool. I was writing down some that were set outside of Europe. So we have like Children of Blood and Bone by Tony Oden. Shadow of the Fox by Julie Kagawa, A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy, and The Star-Touched Queen by Roshani Chakshi, I think. I read romance most of my early adult life. I love Roberta Gellis's books, and most of hers are medieval. She did some earlier, like sort of pure romance, and then she collaborated with, she did a collaboration series of historical fantasy, which was the very first time I ever heard of historical fantasy. I'm like, this is a thing? Like, this is totally me. I think that's what made me an author. But she also does a mystery series set in medieval times, and I really just love the details that she gets in there. So she just passed away a couple of years ago. It makes me sad because I always wanted to meet her, and I wrote to her back when we had to write by pen and paper, and she wrote me back. And then, like, over the years, I found her email address and I emailed her. She always emailed me back every time. And when I went to graduate school, she's like, I hope I get to buy your book someday. But publishers take longer than that. Somebody asked, which topics deserve to be read for research? There's a lot of information on weapons and armor. Do you have other favorite topics that would make you squee to see better depicted?
Go ahead.
I mean, mine's books.
Yeah, now this time Hannah's like, I want to answer.
Always books. Like, obviously, people who are writing fantasy books like books, and so they put a lot of books in their stories. But if you're in medieval Europe, books are expensive, books are hard to make. A book can take a team of people, and if you're writing on parchment, like several dozen cows to make. So the fact that parchment, actual medieval parchment, was made from animal skin, like little things like that, where you go, oh, this is an important part of history, when all books had to be handmade and written on basically leather for hundreds of years. So that's always going to be the thing that'll make me excited. If someone gets a book and it's really expensive, it's like a holy relic.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that just medieval crafts deserve a lot more attention. You know, as you were saying, like, what does it actually take to make a book? What sorts of physical things go into it? What skills does it take to, make parchment and make ink and write and decorate the manuscript? And extending that to other crafts like medieval textiles. What does it take to make some of these fabulous clothes? And I think that gets some attention, but I love it when an author slows down and thinks about the creation process for these physical objects that they're including in their books.
Yeah, I think it's hard to get out of our sort of manufacturing mindset that things just get made and we buy them and we use them. I heard somebody speak one time and said, in these romances that set in medieval times where the guy rips a piece of clothing off, in their haste, like nobody would be ripping clothing off for something like quick, something that happened like sex. Like, that's not a reason to rip your clothing.
Also, a lot of clothing, like it's meant to be durable. Like, you pass it down over generations because it's so hard to make, like spinning each fiber by hand.
Yeah. So I think even going and finding out what it takes, like, those how it's made TV shows, even just looking at that with machines making things, you're like, wow, like I didn't know how much work went into that. Well, think about it. If there were not any machines, they were literally all doing this by hand. So it's definitely not a throwaway society, that's for sure. Here's an interesting one. Is there any specific detail the panelists have written that they knew was historically inaccurate, but kept it in for other reasons and hoped readers would suspend their disbelief? I will understand if nobody wants to divulge.
Ooh. No, that's a good one, and I'm thinking really hard. I have edited a lot more medieval fantasy than I have written, so
you can divulge somebody else's.
Oh, I did let an author let a historical figure live a lot longer than she actually did because she was really cool. I forget which one it was at the time. I think it was Roswitha of Gandersheim, an awesome medieval nun and poet who showed up in a story way she would have been like 90 years old at the time. Like, she wasn't really alive, but she's awesome. So yeah, you can have her.
And that's when you would do an author's note.
Yeah.
So your audience knows, you know, but you needed her for the story. So
yeah.
How about you, Hannah? I know you. Do you write short stories or anything, or
that I don't know. So
you're on the art side? Have you seen anything that you saw in a book that you knew was historically inaccurate, but it worked? It worked for the book.
There's a question I've had reading Game of Thrones when Cersei's clothes, she thinks somebody has like shrunken her clothes, they've made a larger mistake. And I wondered for so long, like, can you shrink clothes in a medieval setting? Like,
Oh.
I know with wool,
yeah.
with wool you can. I don't know about other fibers.
It was like a silk dress, and she says, they shrank my clothes, this is terrible. And like, they didn't put them in the dryer, so
This is why we need to know about medieval textiles and about that's the thing, nobody researches medieval laundry, and they should. Because yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm gonna have to go rewatch Game of Thrones now so I can find that. I did actually one thing in my novel. Mine is set in the time of almost the first in Egypt, and his daughter was the first one born, and I have her born. She's being shown being born in my book, but it's most likely, and it's before the war where he fights to get the other people that are out in the other part of Egypt. But in reality, she was probably born after the war. So that goes in my author's note. I did keep that. So the baby was born early, way early.
Several years early.
Somebody asked, so for our armor people here, can you have embroidered leather breastplates?
Okay, so to sew it, you could like applique, but embroidering leather is, if it's going to be any use as armor, it has to be so thick that it's really hard to sew through. And getting a needle through leather is really hard. So I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's real hard.
Okay, I don't know if you know this one. Would armor like Renfri's from The Witcher be considered wearable? I never saw The Witcher.
Never watched The Witcher, sorry.
Okay. What tech? I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. Like, could we just stay in here for like 4 hours? What technologies or cultural events would you say bookend the medieval period? We have to go to our medieval professor for that.
So this is the thing, like, saying medieval at all is very European centric. You know, if you like saying, you know, medieval Thailand, like that's not a thing.
Right.
If you go anywhere except Northwest Europe, any cultural event that you talk about to mark the beginning or end of it just does not apply. You know, or like in, you know, Mesoamerica, it does not matter at all what's going on in the Roman Empire, or the inventing of the printing press in Europe. Like there's just, wherever you go, there are going to be different political and cultural events to mark the to mark significant shifts in era or useful things to think about. And and it's all completely modern. It's imposed by modern people anyway. Nobody, I guarantee you, like nobody in the year 500 said, okay, well, I guess we're in the Middle Ages now. Like that's just not. If you really want, the end of the Roman Empire, the end of the Western Roman Empire, in the late 400s CE, and the political and economic changes at the end of the 1400s would make good bookends. But there's there's so many other methods of periodization. Yeah.
And one thing I read said a lot of cultures have different Renaissance periods, but they weren't necessarily preceded by what we conceive of as a Middle Ages or a medieval or Dark Ages type of culture.
Right. So. Yeah, and you'll get, even within the medieval period, historians will talk about the 12th century Renaissance or the Carolingian Renaissance.
Yeah.
So like, yes. There are a lot of Renaissances.
You really have to do some deep reading. Even if you're writing history, even if you're writing fantasy, if you're setting in that type of a world, it behooves you to do some deep reading. And like I said, follow the rabbit hole.
You'll find so much fun.
Cool stuff. Somebody said, can you mention, we have 4 minutes left, can you mention anything about food? Is it true that they're all eating gruel?
Okay.
That's what you said. Okay, is everyone always eating gruel really accurate?
No. In Northern Europe, you'd mostly be eating bread. Bread is like the major staple. Elsewhere, like just about everybody would have a garden, so you'd have lots of fruits and veggies that you would grow yourself. One food thing that I will say, and then I will let other people talk. The whole thing about spices covering up the taste of rotting meat, false. Super false. Super false. People could tell just like we could if their meat was off. Also, spices were super expensive in Northern Europe. So if you could afford lots of spices, you could also afford good meat. They had lots of spices on their food because they liked it.
Yeah.
That is all I will say for now, because I've been talking a lot. And I know.
So much to say, it's wonderful.
Do you have anything to add to that, Hannah? There's lots of pictures of food. I mean, we always see pictures of dining.
Mm-hmm. Dining pictures. Turnips. Having turnips means you can keep your animals alive for the winter. That's
I would die if I had to live on turnips.
You give the turnip to the cow, and then you get to keep the cow for a little bit longer.
That's true.
That's what you.
I'll take cheese instead of turnips.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Last question. 2 minutes. How much is too much research? When have you fallen down the hole on details that won't enhance the story? I would say there's not too much research, unless it's preventing you from writing the story. But not all your research goes in your story.
Yes.
The whole
That's the thing.
You know, percent of what you find out goes in your story. You just have to be obsessed with what you're writing about, and then just pick the best parts. Go ahead, Hannah. You look like you're. Oh, okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Rebecca?
No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, it's the only time I stop researching and start writing. One is sometimes you do so much research that you just want to write. Like, okay, I have it in my head and I need to get it on paper. Other times you're like, okay, spending 6 hours a day researching is not getting me any closer to my deadline. you got to stop. But like I said, usually then if I come across something while I'm writing that I need to look up, I will look it up. I won't. Some people just like, you know, make a blank spot and say, I'll look it up later, just so they don't get out of that writing. Eventually, if you want to be an author, you do have to write. So there is a limit to the research you can do. Can you ever do enough? You will never do enough to satisfy all of your readers. You will get letters back if you're writing about a historical topic, about mistakes that you've made, no matter how much research you've done. So there is that. But at some point,
all right, and the presenters for our next panel are starting to arrive. So if you guys have any final thoughts, that would be a good time to give them.
I'm good.
And then we'll break.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This has been like my dream. So thank you for making this available.
Thank you, everyone.